Yes, I'm Anna Edenbrandt from the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, and I'll be presenting a study today that I've done together with my colleague, Bioeconomy. And it's part of a larger project at our university that's interdisciplinary. So we have, among others, plant breeders who are working on that part, as you'll see later on the product. So this study is about the consumer side. So in that way, it touches upon the theme of the keynote we have earlier this morning. So the main motivation for this study is that we know that red meat production is a heavy emitter of greenhouse emissions, and it's also associated with other environmental concerns as well as health concerns. So this implies that a shift is needed towards more plant-based proteins to reduce our environmental impact. And over the past years, meat like plant-based products have become more common in the market and also increased in market share, although it's still on a very low level. And currently, many of those products are based on soy due to its high nutritional value, among other things. But there are also other protein sources coming to the market. So what we think about in this study is how can the new breeding technologies, which enable more precise and faster developments of crops, how can this contribute to the protein chain? And more specifically, how can it provide high nutritional quality proteins that can substitute animal proteins? So an important question then is if consumers are willing to accept such products from genome editing. Just a really brief summary of what we know. There's a large literature that shows that consumers prefer traditionally bred crops, although there's some evidence that there's a higher acceptance when the transfer genes are within related organisms. It's perceived as more natural. And more recently, we also see some evidence of higher acceptance of genome edited crops compared to transgenic crops, such as CRISPR-Cas9, for example. But still, traditionally bred crops remain the most preferred. And we also know that the acceptance of new breeding technologies depends on if the new crops provide benefits in some way. And in particular, we see that acceptance increases if the new crops are more sustainable. For example, they require less pesticides or water use, land use, and so on. But something that's in common with these studies that I mentioned here is that we look at the acceptance or demand or willingness to pay for one tomato that is traditionally bred and one that is CRISPR-Cas9 developed, or potato, or so it's within products when we look at the acceptance. So what we want to do here is see if genome editing can contribute to the protein shift by giving rise to new types of substitutions. So what we do is we explore consumer preferences and demand for meat substitutes based on CRISPR-Cas9 developed crops. And we look at which types of substitutions such products would give rise to if they were introduced on the market. So I'll briefly describe the case that we're investigating in this study. It's potato is it's a potato we're looking at, and potato is a widely grown crop, and a significant share of the harvested potato is used for starch production. And when in starch production, there is a side stream of fluid that contains proteins. But these proteins, it's also interacted with toxics, which disables consumption and currently, and therefore waste. So even if the protein in the potato is very small, about 2%, large amounts in starch production means that a lot of protein is currently wasted. So this is where the breeders come in, where they have come far already with potato, where it's suitable for starch production, but where the size screen the protein is no longer contains the toxics, so it's suitable for production. So in this way, the protein can be used as an ingredient in food products and thereby contribute to reducing food waste. So, given the lack of market presence of CRISPR-Cas9 developed products, and so we apply a stated preference method, more specifically a resource experiment, where participants are asked to make hypothetical purchases of sausages. And distributed this in Sweden last year. This is the design of the experiment, where we included two types of meat sausages: a high premium quality with higher meat share, 75%, and a more standard sausage with 55% meat share. And then the soy-based sausage, which reflects the most common plant-based sausage on the market today, and then the potato protein-based sausage. Each of those alternatives were described by production method, it's organic or conventional, and by its country of origin, where the meat and potato were either produced in Sweden or another EU country, and soy in another EU country or Brazil. And we also did indicated price. And here you see an example of a choice task. They did 5 repeated purchases like this. And before they did it, they got a short piece of information, much like the one I gave to you, about potato protein and starch production. And before each choice, they were reminded that potato protein was developed by CRISPR-Cas9. We used the word gene scissors, which is a popular term in Sweden. So we distributed it here, as I said, excluded the non-sausage eaters. And as you can see, we also had some vegetarians and pescatarians in the sample. So based on the choices that they made, we estimate a discrete choice model, a mixed logic model. And here I have used those estimates to obtain the willingness to pay estimates. So it's directly in the value they're willing to pay for the products. So meat with the lower meat content is the base level. And the values that are in the blue square, there you can see, for example, that on average, consumers are willing to pay about 30 crowns extra for the sausage to be higher meat content. And for the potato, we see that they, on average, require a discount to purchase potato. And in the lower part of the table, we see the product attributes, which are in line with expectations. Consumers prefer domestic or imported, and then organic. And interestingly, if we compare imported meat, low meat content, and domestically produced potato protein developed by CRISPR-Cas9, we see that it's not significantly different. So consumers are on average indifferent between those two products. So I think I'll skip this. So our main interest is to see what would happen if this product wasn't introduced on the market. So we use the model estimates that I presented before, and we predict the market shares in the baseline scenario where we have only meat and soy, and those are displayed in blue. as we can see, meat is, holds the main market share. Soy only constitutes about 4% of the market share. And this is when we set the prices at median level, the median values in the experiment. And then in the second scenario, where we introduce potato protein products, which is displayed in green, you can see that potato protein holds a significant share of the market, and that it mainly draws on substitutions away from meat, and to a small extent. So if we want to see what happens when as prices changes, what happens to market shares, we here plot demand curves for the different product types. So what we do here is that for each of the products, we set the prices fixed for the other products, and then we change the price for the one we're studying. So we can say that if we look at soy, for example, the orange one, you can see that even as the price goes down to the very minimum, demand doesn't increase much at all. While for meat, demand changes a lot when prices change. And the same holds for potato protein. It changes more than soy. And on the right, we can see the effect of demand curve from going from imported to domestic on the potato. And as you can see, this shifts the demand. So the domestic aspect is an important one set up in this product. Yes, so that's the main results of the study. And just some concluding remarks. I think it's an important topic in the way that we've seen in many years that there's a huge concern among consumers in Europe and low acceptance of GMO, for example. But in this study, at least, it's based on political choices, but still we can see a tendency that acceptance is rather high among at least a share of consumers when the product contributes with significant sustainability aspects. Okay, thank you.
Yes. Question.
Yeah.
Does it matter what we tell the consumers about the new product, the new potato? Are there words you can use that encourage them to take it? Are there words that put them off? Did you do any research along those lines?
Yeah, that's a good question. We did a few that I didn't include here, but we tested, for example, if the acceptance changed if we used the technical CRISPR-Cas9 or if we used gene scissors, and we saw no differences in this. We also tested within subject design, so they got more information. Some got information about the health benefits, some about the food waste reduction. And we looked at if that changed, and we saw very little actually on this, quite surprisingly. We saw some effects on the food waste, but none on the health. But I mean, there's many studies showing that with information you can prime consumers.
My daughter's in advertising, so she's quite familiar with the idea of using language really encourages people to buy something.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm wondering if you had a professional who was advising about how to do that.
Yeah, but I'm sure there's many studies showing that you can affect with how you give information. So it's.
I also have a question. You showed this discussion, the trade outcome from after the market implementation of these products. But how did you base this on statistics from this survey or something, how did you came to this?
Like this?
Yeah, this one and the next one. So
Yeah,
is it based on the survey or?
yes, this is based on the, so the main model that we estimate. And then we constrain, so we make predictions based with those estimates.
Yeah, only with like these four products, that there's joint between these products.
Yes.
That's a good question. Did you test what people understood about machine synthesis or the term? Did they really understand what it's about? Did you test it somehow?
No.
Okay.
But that's a good point.
Yeah.
Asking if they actually understand the information they get.
Yeah.
What it implies.
Yeah. Because it's not a term which is so common, maybe. I don't know.
No. No.
So, okay.
For sure. Yeah, that could have been.
Thank you for the presentation. So I'm just curious, can you tell me from your analysis and your sample whether vegetarian and vegetarian in there? Is it these people who are interested in these kind of alternatives for meat, or is it really the meat eaters, or is it those that don't eat meat anyway who will then start buying potato sausage?
Yeah, very good question. And I skipped that for the sake of time, but what we could see is that the soy is mainly purchased or almost only purchased by the vegetarians, to some extent flexitarians. We can see here that we plot the individual level willingness to pay estimates on a number of descriptives here. So for soy, we see that it's huge for vegetarians, which basically means that they're the only ones who are willing to pay at all for this. While for potato protein, it was less so, and we could also see that we had about 4% of vegetarians in the sample, but market share was about 20%. So it seems like this attracts another market share. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just clicking right.
Yeah, you can use both.
Yeah, so hi, welcome to my presentation. I'm Pijpers, I'm first year PhD student at the university. And I will present some work that we did with Edenbrandt on food waste economics. I will present a theoretical model of household food waste production. So first, a bit of context. Food waste is more and more becoming a topic which gets policy aims. For example, SDG 12.3 sets reducing food waste at half by 2030. The EU even additionally aims to have almost no food waste in 2050. So these targets are getting like really high end. And I'm involved in the Zero project funded by the European Commission to investigate how to achieve this food waste predictions together with SILS. The SILS are sort of small-scale innovation labs, seeing how food waste can be reduced. And my task within that is to make models about it. So I will show you what I did. First, in current literature, there are mainly like two ways of modeling household food waste. There's this paper of Hamilton and Richards, and they distinguished like fresh and fresh food, which can produce food waste in a model, against like processed food, which is not perishable and therefore it doesn't produce that much food waste. And then there's another type of modeling, and that's more on the opportunity cost of time. So they assume that people with higher income rather work more than spending time on reducing food waste. So these have been the two types of household food waste models that there are now in literature. And we went a bit further with the model of Hamilton and Richards. And that mainly addressed like the cost function of reducing food waste. So the assumption is to reduce food waste. Of this fresh food, you have to bring in extra efforts, extra costs. And their function was quite specific. So in this function, the data is like a skill parameter just to address like some policy efforts of reducing these costs. The A and the alpha are just some parameters that they chose. And the gamma is the rate of food they actually use. So, so say the 1 minus gamma is how much of this fresh food is actually wasted, and the gamma is what we use. We changed it a bit, so we started to distinguish unavoidable and avoidable food waste, or like edible and non-edible. So this Tuesday was already an example of cherry without a pit. So that this pit is actually a kind of technological improvement to reduce this unedible food waste. So these are more the long-term technological advancements. In our model, we keep it as a parameter, so it's quite constant per food group. In our model, this affordable food waste is optimized by consumers. So that changes a bit more on short term when the unavoidable food waste is more constant. We also include the tau, and the tau is more skill parameter, and an economy of skill parameter. So we also look in the effects of when bigger households, whether people produce more or less food waste. So we also take that into account, which is not that common yet in the food waste literature. And this model is also quite discussion, also really flexible. So it can be applied to all kinds of situations, all kinds of, and yeah, the nice part is that this when this one, the alpha A, so the avoidable food waste rate goes to 0. So when there's almost no avoidable food waste rate, these costs will go up. And if the share of unavoidable food waste rate becomes larger, it is getting more and more expensive to reduce the avoidable food waste rate. So it's really a flexible model in that sense. And now we'll show you, compare it with our results with paper of Hamilton and Richards, how they. So we have here two graphs. Left one is Hamilton Richards, the one on the right is ours. And you should note that this data and our A are more or less the same. So we have A as the skill parameter for policy interventions, so that comes while they use this data. And you should note that they use this 1 minus data. So the graphs are a bit like reversed opposite of each other. But actually this same show a rather comparable image. So when it becomes more expensive to actually use the food waste and to actually use the fresh food. So when this food use rate becomes higher, so less food will be wasted, and these costs go up, then consumers starts to switch to more processed food. So it becomes too expensive for them to actually use this fresh food. So there's a substitution effect as a result of this higher costs. You can also see that higher costs leads to like less efforts of households to reduce this to increase food use rate, so to reduce food waste per day. Then we also showed this graph with actual food waste reduction and the edible food waste rate. So we can see that increasing this scale parameters or higher cost using food waste leads to an increase in this edible food waste rate. So then more will be wasted when the cost of producing avoiding it becomes larger. But their model actually showed that kind of a weird, really extreme curve. Ours a bit more flat, so it's interesting to see. While this scale is rather very large. Then we also look what the price of fresh food does with the share of food waste. And we can see that this price increase of fresh food, food waste reduces, but the edible food waste rate reduces not as much. That's also because consumers starts to substitute to the processed food because that's cheaper for them in this model. And therefore food waste rate declines, but not much changes with this edible food waste rate. And we can see like the opposite for processed food. So when price of processed food increased in our model, not so much happens with the edible food waste rate, but more food waste is produced because consumers switch again to the fresh food instead. What's also interesting to note, I should have said it with the previous slide as well, but the curve of Hamilton Ridge is like really parabolic, and that's due to their quite specific cost function here. But it's a weird thing that when this price of processed food increased, first food waste also increases, but then declines again. We couldn't explain it. We therefore think like this graph is a bit more intuitive in that sense. Then the effects of the scale. Hamilton and Richard didn't include it, so there's another comparison between their take and ours. But it's just to show the effects of this scale. So you can see when the scale increases, fresh food consumption goes up and processed food consumption goes down. And you see that food waste first increases as a result of this, but then the food waste rate decreases, and therefore also food waste reduces after the scale increases. And yeah, a graph which shows the effects of this previous slide said this unavoidable food waste rate is 0 because we made a comparison with Hamilton Ridges. But now you can see a comparison when you change it a bit larger compared to this situation with the 0. You can see that actually the graph moves a bit to the left. So you can see that it's more expensive for consumers to reduce this edible food waste rate, and therefore the effects are a bit more larger than without this unavoidable food waste rate. And there's another one which can to show the food waste prediction. It's a little bit higher with when the food waste unavoidable food waste is a bit higher, so it's what you would expect in this model. So therefore I come to my conclusions. Yeah, this distinguish between edible and inedible food waste is, yeah, this really matter in the consumer choice of avoiding food waste. The graphs show that there are really different effects when you have more unavoidable food waste. And scale effects also quite have an impact on this model, on the food waste prediction of households. So, thank you, and are there any questions?